My name is Molly, and I am 34 years old. I was sitting at my parents' mahogany dining table, the tension thick enough to slice with the sterling silver knife beside my untouched plate. My mother's face had turned that particular shade of crimson that only appeared when she was about to explode. And explode she did. "You will not get an inheritance, never!" she screamed. The room fell silent. But instead of tears or anger, I smiled. I reached for my phone. If you want to know why I was so calm in that moment, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe to see more stories about standing your ground. Before I show you what happened when I pulled up my account balance, let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in Westchester County, New York, in a mansion that my father never failed to remind us he had built with his bare hands. Of course, those hands had never actually laid a brick or hammered a nail. What he meant was that he had created a luxury real estate empire from nothing, transforming himself from the son of middle-class teachers into one of the wealthiest developers on the East Coast. My mother, Margaret, came from old money that had mostly dried up by the time she met my father, Thomas. What she lacked in current funds, she made up for in social connections and an encyclopedic knowledge of which fork to use for which course. She threw herself into the role of social climber, with the determination of someone who had tasted privilege and refused to let it go. Our home was a showcase, our lives a performance, and any deviation from the script was treated as betrayal. I was the middle child sandwiched between my older brother James and younger sister Abigail. James was the golden child groomed from birth to take over the family business. He had our father's broad shoulders and commanding presence, along with a particular talent for making people feel simultaneously impressed and intimidated. He joined the family business straight out of Wharton, just as our father had planned. Abigail was 5 years younger than me and initially showed signs of being even more rebellious than I was. She dyed her honey blonde hair black in high school and declared she wanted to be a photographer. But eventually, she folded under the weight of our parents' expectations. Now she runs the charitable foundation arm of the family business, which mostly involves organizing galas where rich people congratulate themselves for donating money. Then there was me. From an early age, I showed little interest in the things that mattered in my parents' world. While my mother tried to teach me about China patterns and social hierarchies, I was taking apart computers in my bedroom and putting them back together. When my father talked about real estate markets at dinner, I would ask questions about the software his company used, earning eye rolls from everyone except our IT consultant, who started bringing me books about coding. "Computers are for secretaries, Molly." My mother would say, her lips pursed in that special way that made me feel 2 inches tall. My first major conflict with my parents came during my senior year of high school. Despite perfect grades at the prestigious private academy they had chosen, I announced that I wanted to attend State University for their excellent computer science program, rather than my father's Ivy League alma mater. "No daughter of mine is going to attend a public university," my father had roared over dinner one night. "We did not spend a fortune on your education for you to throw it all away." My mother's approach was more insidious. "Darling," she said, refilling her wine glass for the third time that evening, "think about who you'll meet there. No one of quality. Is that really the circle you want for yourself? What about finding a suitable husband?" These conversations would always take place during our formal Sunday dinners, a tradition my mother maintained with religious fervor. We would dress up, gather in the dining room with its cathedral ceilings and crystal chandelier, and take turns reporting our achievements for the week. James always had impressive updates about networking events or business deals. Abigail, even in her rebellious phase, could at least mention good grades or social engagements with appropriate friends. My updates about coding projects or technology innovations were met with polite smiles that never reached their eyes. My father would quickly change the subject, asking James about the golf game he'd played with a potential investor, or complimenting Abigail on her piano recital. As these dinners continued throughout my teenage years, I felt myself growing more distant from my family, though I still desperately wanted their approval. I started censoring my updates, mentioning only things I thought they would find acceptable. But it never worked. There was always something wrong with what I had accomplished or how I had accomplished it. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say in a tone that conveyed the exact opposite. Did you hear that Senator Wilson's daughter was accepted to all 8 Ivy League schools? Now that's an achievement worth mentioning. By the time I graduated high school, I had developed a thick skin and a private determination to succeed on my own terms. Despite my parents' objections, I accepted the scholarship to State University and packed my bags, ignoring my mother's dramatic predictions of my imminent failure and ruin. College was like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued the things I valued and saw potential in the ideas that my family had dismissed. My roommate Tara was studying electrical engineering and didn't own a single pair of pearl earrings. My study group included scholarship kids from public schools who coded circles around the private school graduates. During my sophomore year, I met Professor Larson, who would become my most important mentor. After I aced his notoriously difficult advanced algorithms class, he called me into his office. "You have a gift, Molly," he said, leaning back in his chair and studying me over his glasses. "But more importantly, you have the drive. What are you planning to do with it?" No one had ever asked me that question before. My parents had always told me what I should do, never asking what I wanted. Professor Larson listened as I awkwardly articulated my interest in financial technology and creating systems that could make banking more accessible to people without traditional financial backgrounds. "My father thinks banking is for men in suits who went to Yale," I said, immediately regretting bringing my family into the conversation. Professor Larson smiled. "And yet, some of the most innovative financial technologies are being created by people who look nothing like that, including young women who went to state schools." With his encouragement, I applied for a summer internship at a tech company that was developing new payment processing systems. To my shock, I was accepted. I spent that summer in a cramped office in Chicago working longer hours than I ever had, and loving every minute of it. When I returned for my junior year, I was on fire with ideas. I started developing an app that helped college students manage their finances and avoid predatory credit card debt. It was simple, but it worked, and by the end of the year, over half the campus was using it. A local bank even approached me about purchasing the rights. I called home bursting with excitement about my first real success. My mother answered. "That's nice, dear," she said after I explained. "Did you know James just closed a $10 million deal on that property in Greenwich your father is taking us all to St. Bart's to celebrate? Such a shame you're too busy playing with computers to join us." By graduation, my app had been purchased and integrated into the bank's official platform. Professor Larson introduced me to contacts at several prestigious tech companies, and I received job offers from 3 of them. The starting salary at the best one was higher than I had dared to hope for. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, sitting stiffly in their designer clothes among the more casually dressed families. My mother air-kissed my cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "Congratulations, darling," she said. "Now that this phase is over, perhaps you'll consider graduate school somewhere more appropriate. It's not too late to correct your path." My father handed me an envelope containing a check for $5,000. "A graduation gift," he said. "Use it wisely. Perhaps as a down payment on a suitable car or professional wardrobe. You'll need to make a good impression if you want to advance." Neither of them asked about my job offers or future plans. The real confrontation came 2 days later, when I announced over dinner that I had accepted a position with a tech company in San Francisco. "California," my mother gasped, as though I'd said I was moving to Mars. "But that's on the other side of the country." "That's where the tech industry is centered, Mom." "Nonsense," my father interrupted. "There are plenty of technology companies here in New York. I could make a call to Richardson at Global Financial. They have an IT department." "I don't want to work in an IT department, Dad. I want to build new systems, create products that help people." "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "I've built a business that will support this family for generations. James is already learning the ropes. There's a place for you too, Molly. Real estate is a concrete investment. This internet bubble will burst, and then where will you be?" "The internet is not a bubble, Dad. It's the future. And I want to be part of building that future." "Real success," he said, stabbing his finger toward me, "means following tradition, building on the foundation your ancestors created, not running off to California to join some fad." My mother's approach was more emotional. "After all we've done for you." she said, tears welling in her perfectly made-up eyes. The sacrifices we've made, the opportunities we've provided. And this is how you repay us, by abandoning your family. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach, the one that always appeared when they made me feel selfish for having my own dreams. But for once, I didn't back down. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said quietly. I'm building a life, my life. If you go to California, my father said, his voice cold, don't expect any help from us. No connections, no financial support beyond what we've already given you. You want independence, fine. Be independent. 2 weeks later, I boarded a plane to San Francisco with 2 suitcases and a laptop, my graduation check serving as my emergency fund. My mother didn't come to the airport. My father gave me a stiff hug and told me not to come crawling back when things didn't work out. Only Abigail seemed genuinely sad to see me go. I wish I had your courage, she whispered as she hugged me goodbye. San Francisco was beautiful, vibrant, and shockingly expensive. My salary, which had seemed impressive during the job offer, barely covered the cost of a tiny apartment that I shared with 3 other young professionals. For the first time in my life, I had to budget carefully, learn to cook instead of ordering takeout, and take public transportation instead of calling a car service. My job was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. While I had the technical skills, I struggled with the office politics and the long hours. My supervisor, Dave, was brilliant but demanding, and he had little patience for newcomers who couldn't keep up. More than once, I found myself hiding in a bathroom stall, trying not to cry after a particularly harsh critique. My relationship with my family continued through occasional strained phone calls. My mother would update me on family events I was missing and social connections I was losing. My father would briefly inquire about my work before changing the subject to James's latest achievement. Your brother just purchased his first property, he announced during one call, pride evident in his voice. 28 years old and already building his own portfolio. That's great, Dad, I said, not mentioning that most of my salary was going toward rent and student loan payments. There was no portfolio in my foreseeable future. After 6 months in California, I flew home for Christmas, using most of my savings for the ticket. I arrived at my parents' house to find it transformed into a winter wonderland, with professional decorations and a catering staff preparing for the annual holiday party. Molly, my mother said when I arrived, giving me a quick hug before stepping back to examine me critically. You look tired. And what happened to your hair? I had cut my long brown hair into a practical bob typical of many women in my industry. It's easier to maintain, Mom. Well, there's no time to fix it now. The guests will be arriving in 2 hours. Your dress is laid out in your old room. I took the liberty of selecting something appropriate since I wasn't sure what you'd bring from out there. The party was a blur of my parents' friends and business associates, most of whom expressed surprise that I was working with computers, and then quickly moved on to more interesting topics. My cousin Stephanie cornered me by the dessert table to inform me that she was engaged to a surgeon and planning a summer wedding at the Plaza Hotel. You'll come back for it, won't you? She asked, though her tone suggested she was merely being polite. I mean, if you can get the time off from your little job. James spent the evening holding court near the fireplace, regaling my father's business partners with stories of his real estate conquests. Abigail flitted between groups playing the perfect hostess in training. On Christmas morning, we gathered around the giant tree to exchange gifts. I had spent considerable thought on my selections despite my limited budget. For my father, a rare first edition of his favorite business book. For my mother, a handcrafted silk scarf from a local San Francisco artist. For James, specialty coffee beans from a famous California roaster. For Abigail, a photography book from a gallery I had discovered. My parents gave me a designer handbag that, while beautiful, was completely impractical for my lifestyle and probably cost more than my monthly rent. James gave me a gift card to Tiffany's. Abigail gave me a handmade bracelet that I suspected she had actually put thought into. The disaster came at Christmas dinner when my uncle asked about my job. So, Molly Margaret tells me you're working for some internet company now. What exactly do you do all day, play on Facebook? He laughed at his own joke. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. It's just a phase, Richard. She'll come to her senses eventually. Did you know her cousin Stephanie is marrying Dr. Peter Reynolds in June? Perhaps she'll meet someone suitable at the wedding. Actually, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I'm developing financial software that helps banks process transactions more securely. It's challenging and important work. Banks have been processing transactions just fine for hundreds of years without newfangled software, my uncle replied. Not really, I said. Financial fraud costs billions annually, and outdated systems are a major vulnerability. Our platform reduced fraudulent transactions by 63% in our first client bank. The table fell silent. My father cleared his throat. Speaking of banks, James has just secured financing for the new development in Westport. Tell them about it, son. And just like that, I was invisible again. I returned to California, determined to prove them all wrong. I threw myself into my work, often staying at the office until midnight and returning at 7 the next morning. I volunteered for the most difficult projects, took on extra responsibilities, and focused on building a reputation as someone who could solve problems no one else could tackle. The cost was high. My health suffered from the stress and lack of sleep. I developed migraines and stomach problems. My few friendships withered as I canceled plans to work late. I rarely called home, and when I did, the conversations left me feeling worse. Your cousin Stephanie's wedding was magnificent, my mother reported. Everyone important was there. Such a shame you couldn't make it back. I hadn't been invited. The rock bottom came when a major project I had been leading failed spectacularly during its launch. A bug in the code that I had overlooked caused the entire system to crash, costing the client thousands of dollars in lost transactions before we could fix it. Dave was furious. The client was threatening to pull their business, and I was convinced my career was over before it had really begun. I sat alone in my tiny apartment that night, surrounded by empty takeout containers and unwashed laundry, seriously considering booking a flight home and admitting defeat. My phone rang. It was Abigail. "Hey sis," she said, "just checking in. How are things in the tech world?" I burst into tears and told her everything. To my surprise, she listened without judgment. "Molly," she said when I had finished, "do you remember when you were 10 and built that elaborate dollhouse with working lights and an elevator and Dad said it was a waste of time?" "Yeah," I sniffled. "Even then you saw possibilities that the rest of us missed. You've always been like that. Don't give up now just because things are hard. That's not the Molly I know." That conversation was a turning point. I realized I had been trying to succeed partly to prove my family wrong, which was draining my passion for the work itself. I started making small changes. I left the office by 7 most nights. I joined a yoga class to manage stress. I made friends with my roommates and other young professionals in my building. Most importantly, I reconnected with what had drawn me to technology in the first place: the ability to create solutions that helped real people. And in doing so, I found a support network of like-minded colleagues who became the family I chose for myself. The idea came to me during a weekend hackathon, an event where programmers gathered to collaborate intensively on projects. My team was developing a simple budgeting app when I had a revelation about democratizing investment opportunities. What if there was a platform that allowed average people to invest in real estate with as little as $100? A system that broke down the barriers my father's industry had maintained for generations. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with possibilities. The next morning, I sketched out the basic architecture for what would eventually become Accessible Assets, a financial technology platform that would change my life. I started developing the platform during evenings and weekends while maintaining my day job. When I had a working prototype, I began approaching potential investors. The rejections were numerous and often harsh. Real estate investing is complicated for a reason, one venture capitalist told me. The average person doesn't have the knowledge or capital to participate. That's just reality. It was exactly the kind of elitist attitude I was trying to disrupt. After 27 rejections, I finally met Diana Wright, a veteran investor who had made her fortune by betting on ideas others dismissed. She listened to my pitch with a neutral expression, asking pointed questions that showed she understood both the technical and business aspects. "You're going up against entrenched interests," she said when I finished. Old money, old systems, old thinking. It won't be easy. I know, I replied. I grew up in that world. And yet you're trying to change it. She studied me for a moment. That's either very brave or very foolish. Let's find out which. With Diana's seed funding, I quit my day job and devoted myself to accessible assets full time. I assembled a small team of talented developers and finance experts who believed in the vision. We worked out of a converted warehouse with spotty heating and shared bathrooms, but the energy was electric. A week after I left my job, my mother called. "Your father heard from Dave Chen that you've quit," she said without preamble. "Honestly, Molly, this impulsiveness has to stop. First moving across the country, now throwing away a perfectly good job to chase some pipe dream." "It's not a pipe dream, Mom. I've secured funding and assembled a team. We're building something important." And when it falls apart, what then? Don't come crying to us for help. Your father and I wash our hands of this foolishness. I worked through Thanksgiving that year, sending a brief email to my parents, explaining that I couldn't make it home. They didn't respond. Christmas was spent with my team celebrating our first successful test deployment with cheap champagne and pizza in the office. While my family was skiing in Aspen, I was negotiating with our first major client, a regional bank that was willing to take a chance on our platform. When they signed the contract in February, it was the validation we had been waiting for. The next year was a blur of 18-hour days, technical challenges, and small victories that gradually built momentum. Our user base grew from hundreds to thousands. Revenue began to flow in modest at first, and then increasingly substantial. I was able to move into my own apartment, small, but all mine in a decent neighborhood. I tried again to share my success with my family. I sent my parents a link to an industry newsletter that featured our platform, mentioning that we had just signed our 10th banking partner. My father replied with a brief, "Good for you," and then asked if I could recommend a good hotel in San Francisco for his upcoming business trip. He didn't suggest meeting while he was in town. As accessible assets continued to grow, we attracted attention from larger financial institutions. Our team expanded to 20, then 50. We moved into real offices with our logo on the door. I hired a chief financial officer who helped us prepare for a Series A funding round. The night before our pitch to major venture capital firms, I couldn't sleep. I found myself thinking about my father, wondering if he would finally see value in what I had built. I pulled out my phone and looked at our latest valuation, $50 million. The company I had created from nothing was now worth more than some of the properties my father had spent decades developing. I didn't call him. The Series A round was oversubscribed with firms competing to invest. We closed at $70 million in funding, with a company valuation that made me on paper at least a very wealthy woman. I bought my first home, a modern townhouse with a view of the bay. I could have afforded something much larger, but I had learned to appreciate simplicity. A profile of me appeared in a business magazine highlighting accessible assets as a disruptor in the financial technology space. I sent a copy to my parents with a note saying I was thinking of them. My mother sent a thank you card as she would for any gift. There was no mention of the article or my accomplishments. For 3 years, I maintained minimal contact with my family. I sent gifts on appropriate occasions. I called on major holidays. I received similarly perfunctory responses. I told myself it didn't matter that I had moved beyond needing their approval. Most days, I almost believed it. The call from Abigail came on a Tuesday afternoon as I was reviewing quarterly projections with my executive team. "Dad had a heart attack," she said without preamble. "It was mild. He's going to be okay, but Mom is freaking out. I think you should come home." I was on a plane that evening, my assistant rescheduling meetings, and my COO stepping in to handle day-to-day operations. Despite everything, they were still my family. And perhaps a small voice whispered this would be the moment they finally saw me clearly. The family estate looked exactly as I remembered, imposing and immaculate. My mother answered the door herself, something she would normally consider beneath her dignity. "Molly," she said, her voice cool despite the circumstances, "you didn't need to come all this way. Your father is resting and doesn't want to be disturbed." "Hello to you too, Mom," I said, stepping past her into the marble foyer. "I'll just put my things in my old room." "We've converted it to a home gym," she replied, Titisid. The blue guest room is made up for you. I found my father in his study the next morning looking frailer than I remembered, but still formidable in his monogrammed robe. He was reviewing papers despite doctor's orders to rest. So you came, he said, glancing up briefly. Your mother said you might. Of course I came, Dad. You had a heart attack. Minor cardiac event, he corrected. Nothing to worry about. I'll be back at the office next week. Should you be working so soon? I asked, gesturing to the papers scattered across his desk. The business doesn't run itself. He shuffled the documents, clearly uncomfortable with my presence. James has been handling things, but there are matters I need to personally oversee. I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he stacked the papers. Can I help with anything? Unless you've suddenly developed an interest in real estate development, I doubt it. The conversation stalled. We had never known how to talk to each other, and 3 years of distance hadn't improved things. That night, Abigail slipped into my room after dinner, closing the door quietly behind her. Things are worse than they're letting on, she whispered, perching on the edge of my bed like we used to do as teenagers, sharing secrets. With Dad's health, with everything. She twisted her hands in her lap. The business is struggling. Has been for a while. The market's changing, and Dad refuses to adapt. James has made some risky investments that haven't panned out. They've had to let go of staff. There's talk of selling properties at a loss. Why didn't anyone tell me? Abigail gave me a look that said the answer should be obvious. Pride. You know how they are, especially with you being so successful on your own. I'm not that successful, I said automatically, the old habit of minimizing my achievements kicking in. Please. I read the articles, Molly. I know what accessible assets is worth. She lowered her voice further. I think they might lose the house. The revelation shocked me. The house had always seemed as permanent as a mountain, the physical manifestation of my parents' success and status. Surely it's not that bad. Mom fired the landscaping service last month. She's been doing the flower arrangements herself. When has Mom ever done manual labor? The next day, I overheard my parents arguing in the kitchen. We have to tell them eventually, Margaret. My father was saying, his voice strained. Tell them what? That their father is a failure, that we might be forced to move into some condominium like common people. I am not a failure. The market turned. These things happen. Not to us, they don't, not to the Harringtons. What will I tell the charity committee? How will I show my face at the club? I retreated before they could discover me eavesdropping, my mind racing. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for my parents. Their identities were so wrapped up in their wealth and status that losing it would be like losing themselves. That evening, my mother announced that we would be having the traditional Sunday dinner 2 days early. Your father is feeling stronger, and it would be good for all of us to maintain some normalcy, she declared. I've invited your Aunt Patricia and Uncle Richard, and the Whitmores from next door. I recognize the strategy. Appearances above all else. Act as though everything is fine, and perhaps it will be. I had a sinking feeling about the dinner, but agreed to attend. As I prepared for the evening, I made a decision. I would make one last attempt to bridge the gap with my family. If they rejected it, I would finally accept that some relationships couldn't be fixed and move on with my life without looking back. The dining room was set with the same formal elegance I remembered from childhood. Fine china crystal glasses, silver candlesticks that had supposedly been in my mother's family for generations. Fresh flowers that I now knew my mother had arranged herself. The scene of countless humiliations and disappointments. My aunt and uncle arrived first, air-kissing my mother, and expressing exaggerated concern for my father's health. The Whitmores followed, bringing an expensive bottle of wine and neighborhood gossip. James arrived last, wearing a custom suit, and the confident expression of someone with a secret. We took our seats according to my mother's carefully planned arrangement. I found myself between Aunt Patricia and Mrs. Whitmore, directly across from James, and as far from my father at the head of the table as possible. The first 2 courses passed with uncomfortable small talk about the weather, local politics, and mutual acquaintances. My mother kept the wine flowing freely, perhaps hoping it would ease the undercurrent of tension. I noticed she barely touched her own food, her eyes constantly darting around the table to ensure everything was perfect. As the main course was served, Uncle Richard turned his attention to me. So, Molly's still out in California playing with your computer programs. Yes, Uncle Richard, my company is doing quite well. Company? He raised his eyebrows. How grand. And what exactly does this company of yours do again? Before I could answer, James cleared his throat dramatically. While we're on the subject of business, I have an announcement to make. All eyes turned to him. My father straightened in his chair, something like hope flickering across his face. Harrington Real Estate is expanding, James declared, raising his glass. We've secured financing for a major new development in Fairfield County. Luxury condominiums with all the amenities the modern elite demand. It's going to revolutionize the market and establish us as the premier developer in the region once again. I could see the desperation beneath his confident smile. This wasn't an expansion. It was a Hail Mary pass. I caught Abigail's eye across the table, and she gave a tiny headshake. Don't challenge him. Not here. Not now. My father stood shakily, raising his glass. To Harrington Real Estate, he said. A legacy that will endure for generations. Everyone drank except me. I couldn't participate in the charade. As dessert was served, my mother turned the conversation to family traditions. The annual Harbor Gala is coming up next month, she announced. The Harringtons will have our usual table of course. James, you'll escort Sophia Henderson. Her father just made partner at Goldman, and she's recently divorced. James nodded, accepting the assignment like a good soldier. Abigail, you'll go with Peter Crawford. His mother tells me he's finally finished his surgical residency. Abigail murmured her agreement, though I noticed she didn't look particularly enthused. And Molly, my mother paused, studying me with a critical eye. Well, if you're still in town, perhaps we can find someone suitable. Though you really should do something about your hair before then. Actually, Mom, I'll be back in San Francisco by then. We're preparing for some major company developments. Always running off to play with your little internet project, she said dismissively. Some things never change. It's not a little project, I said, keeping my voice level. Accessible Assets employs over 200 people now and has transformed how thousands of Americans invest in real estate. Real estate? My father looked at me directly for the first time that evening. What would you know about real estate? Quite a lot, actually. Our platform allows people to invest in property with as little as $100, breaking down the barriers that have traditionally kept average Americans out of the market. James snorted. That's not real estate development, that's just some app. An app that's democratizing an industry that's been exclusionary for centuries, I countered. People who could never afford to buy property can now build wealth through partial ownership and see real returns. Sounds like a scheme to me, Uncle Richard interjected. Real wealth comes from real assets, solid investments passed down through families. Speaking of which, Thomas, have you updated your estate planning since your health incident? My father shifted uncomfortably. Everything is in order. James will take control of the business, of course. The family properties will be divided appropriately. Appropriately? My mother echoed, her voice rising slightly. You mean equally between the children after all we've discussed? Now is hardly the time, Margaret, my father muttered. On the contrary, I think it's exactly the time. She insisted, the wine making her bolder. Why should someone who has abandoned family traditions and responsibilities benefit equally? Why should someone who moved across the country and barely calls home be rewarded the same as those who have remained loyal? The table fell silent. Even the Whitmores looked uncomfortable. Mom, Abigail said softly, maybe we should discuss this privately later. No, let's discuss it now. My mother continued, her voice growing sharper. Let's be honest for once. James has dedicated his life to the family business. Abigail has maintained her position in society and upheld our family values. And Molly ran away to California to play entrepreneur and barely acknowledges her family exists. That's not fair, I said quietly. Fair? You want to talk about fair? My mother's face was flushing with anger. Is it fair that your father and I gave you every advantage, the best schools, the right connections, and you threw it all back in our faces? Is it fair that while James is working 80-hour weeks trying to save the business your father built, you're off playing tech genius and ignoring your family responsibilities? I didn't know the business needed saving, I said. No one told me. Why would we tell you? What could you possibly do to help write us an app? James sneered. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I've built a successful company from nothing. I understand finance, investment structures, market trends. I might have insights that could help. We don't need your charity, my mother snapped. It's not charity, Mom. It's family helping family. Isn't that what you always taught us? Family? My mother's voice rose to a near shout. Family stays. Family sacrifices. Family puts tradition and legacy above selfish ambition. You made your choice when you left Molly. You chose your path, and it's not the Harrington path. Margaret, my father warned, glancing nervously at the Whitmores. But she was too far gone, years of resentment pouring out like a broken dam. You will not get an inheritance, never, she screamed, slamming her hand on the table hard enough to make the crystal glasses jump. If your father has any sense left, he'll write you out of the will entirely. Let your precious California company support you. The room fell silent. Aunt Patricia's mouth was hanging open. Uncle Richard was studying his wineglass intently. The Whitmores looked like they wanted to disappear through the floor. Abigail was staring at her plate. James was watching me with a mixture of anger and triumph, clearly expecting me to crumble under our mother's assault. Instead, I smiled. The expression seemed to confuse everyone at the table. My mother's rage faltered momentarily. "What are you smiling about?" she demanded. Without speaking, I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone. I opened the banking app and navigated to my investment portfolio, then placed the phone on the table and slid it toward the center where everyone could see the screen. The number displayed was my personal net worth, just over $87 million. For several seconds, no one spoke. My father squinted at the screen, then looked up at me with genuine surprise in his eyes. My mother's face went from red to pale in an instant. James stared at the number, then at me, his expression hardening. "That can't be real," he finally said. "It is," I replied calmly. "And that's just my personal assets. Accessible Assets as a company was valued at $260 million in our last funding round. We're preparing for an IPO that analysts predict will push that valuation to over $500 million. $500 million, Uncle Richard repeated weakly. Give or take. I picked up my phone and returned it to my bag. I didn't come here to flaunt my success or to make anyone feel bad about their financial situation. I came because despite everything, you're my family and I care about you. But I won't sit here and be insulted for pursuing my own path, especially when that path has led to exactly the kind of success you always claim to value." My mother was still struggling to find words. But you never said, would you have listened if I had? When have you ever truly listened to me, Mom? When have any of you? I looked around the table. You decided who I was and what I was capable of before I had a chance to show you. So now you come back to rub our noses in it, James demanded. Now that we're struggling and you're riding high, you want to play the magnanimous daughter. No, James. I came back because Abigail called and said Dad had a health scare. I came because that's what family does. I stood up slowly. The irony is that the platform I built, the one you all dismissed as a little internet project, could probably help stabilize the family business if you were willing to consider new approaches to real estate investment. My father cleared his throat. What do you mean? The market has changed, Dad. Traditional development alone isn't enough anymore. Diversification, technology, integration, alternative funding models. These are all opportunities the company could explore. She's just showing off, my mother interrupted, finding her voice again. Trying to act superior. Actually, Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Whitmore spoke up unexpectedly. I've read about accessible assets in the Financial Times. It's quite revolutionary. Several of my colleagues have invested through the platform with impressive returns. My mother's face fell further. There was nothing she respected more than the good opinion of the neighbors. I didn't build my company to prove anything to anyone, I said, reaching for my napkin and placing it beside my barely touched plate. I built it because I saw a problem that needed solving and had the skills to solve it. I'm proud of what I've accomplished, not because of the money, but because we've created something that helps people who were previously shut out of the real estate market. I looked directly at my mother. You've always talked about legacy, Mom. Well, this is mine. Well, not inherited, Not handed to me, but built with my own mind and my own hands. If that's not worthy of your respect, then I don't know what would be. I turned to my father. I'm glad you're recovering, Dad. If you ever want to discuss how accessible assets might partner with Harrington Real Estate in ways that could benefit both companies, my door is always open. Not as charity, but as sound business. Then I walked out of the dining room with my head held high, leaving a stunned silence behind me. The drive back to my hotel was a blur of conflicting emotions. Vindication, yes, but also a deep sadness for what my family relationship might have been in a different world. I had finally stood up for myself in a way that couldn't be dismissed, but the victory felt hollow. When I reached my room, I called Rachel my business partner and closest friend. How did it go? She asked, concern evident in her voice. She had been skeptical about my trip home from the beginning. About as well as you'd expect, I replied, kicking off my heels and sinking onto the bed. My mother disowned me at dinner, so I showed them my portfolio balance. Rachel's laugh was sympathetic. Wow, that must have been quite a scene. It was necessary, I think, but not particularly satisfying. I sighed. I'm ready to come home, to my real home. A soft knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Someone's here. I'll call you back. I opened the door to find Abigail standing in the hallway, still dressed in her dinner outfit, but with her careful makeup streaked by tears. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I stepped aside to let her enter, then closed the door behind her. Are you okay? I should be asking you that. She sat on the edge of the bed. I'm so sorry, Molly. What Mom said was horrible. It wasn't anything I haven't heard before, just more direct this time. After you left, it was chaos. Mom had a complete meltdown. Dad actually looked impressed, though he tried to hide it. James stormed out. The Whitmores made some excuse and left immediately, but I overheard Mr. Whitmore telling Dad he should talk to you about your business ideas. I sat beside her. And how are you feeling about all this? Honestly proud of you, and ashamed that I haven't stood up for you more over the years. She twisted her hands in her lap. I've always taken the path of least resistance. It was easier to go along with Mom and Dad's expectations than fight them like you did. Everyone has their own journey, Abs. I don't blame you for your choices. But my choices have consequences too. I'm 30 years old and still living a life my parents designed for me. She looked up at me. Did you really mean what you said about helping the family business? Of course. Despite everything, I don't want to see Dad's legacy crumble, or see you and Mom lose your home. They'd never accept charity. It wouldn't be charity. It would be a business arrangement. Accessible assets could help Harrington Real Estate modernize and adapt to changing market conditions. We could create a specialized investment vehicle for their properties, bring in new capital without traditional bank loans. She studied me for a moment. You've already thought this through, haven't you? I started running the numbers on the plane. It's what I do. I smiled ruefully. Old habits. Abigail stayed for another hour, and for the first time in years, maybe ever, we talked openly about our family dynamics, our choices, and our futures. When she left, something had shifted between us. A new understanding, a stronger bond. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel and headed to the airport. I had done what I came to do, and while the outcome wasn't what I might have hoped for, it felt like a necessary conclusion to a chapter of my life. It was time to focus on the future. A month after I returned to San Francisco, Accessible Assets went public. The IPO was even more successful than our projections, pushing my personal net worth well into 9 figures and making headlines in the financial press. I received congratulatory messages from colleagues, investors, and even former professors. Nothing from my parents. Then 2 days after the IPO, my phone rang with my father's number. Molly, he said when I answered, his voice formal but not cold. I've been following the news about your company. Hello, Dad. Yes, the IPO went well. Better than well from what I read. He cleared his throat. I may have been hasty in my assessment of your business acumen. Coming from my father, this was practically an apology on bended knee. Thank you for saying that. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about potential collaboration between our companies. If you were serious about that offer, I'd be interested in discussing possibilities. It wasn't quite the emotional reconciliation I might have dreamed of as a child, but it was something. A recognition. A beginning. I was serious, Dad. I think there could be mutually beneficial opportunities. Good, good. He paused. Your mother sends her regards. Translation. Your mother is too proud to call herself, but wants to keep the door open. I understood the language of my family. Tell her I said hello. Over the following months, a careful collaboration began between Accessible Assets and Harrington Real Estate. I assigned a dedicated team to develop a specialized investment platform for their properties, allowing them to raise capital while maintaining management control. I insisted that all meetings include both James and my father, forcing my brother to engage with me as a business equal, rather than a little sister to be dismissed. Initially, James was resistant and suspicious, convinced I was trying to take over or show him up. But as the partnership began to show positive results, his attitude gradually shifted from hostility to grudging respect. The family business stabilized, then began to grow again by embracing new models and technologies. My father, to his credit, proved more adaptable than I had expected once he saw the potential benefits. My mother maintained a polite distance, occasionally joining video calls to say hello, but never discussing business matters directly with me. 6 months after the IPO, I made a decision that surprised even me. Through an anonymous holding company, I purchased my parents' mortgage from the bank that held it. They would never know unless they defaulted, which the improved business situation made unlikely, but it gave me peace of mind to know they wouldn't lose their home. I also established a scholarship at my old university, specifically for young women interested in financial technology, naming it after the Harrington family. It was my way of honoring where I came from, while supporting where I wanted the industry to go. A year after the disastrous dinner, I returned to my parents' home for another Sunday gathering. This time the atmosphere was different. My father greeted me with a firm handshake that lingered a moment longer than necessary. My mother's hug was still stiff, but it was a hug nonetheless. James brought his new girlfriend, a sharp-minded investment banker, who asked intelligent questions about accessible assets. Abigail showed me photos of her recent photography exhibition, a passion she had finally returned to with my encouragement. The conversation still had awkward moments, and old patterns occasionally reasserted themselves. But when my father raised his glass in a toast, he said, "To the Harringtons, all of them each making their mark in their own way." My mother didn't contradict him. As I flew back to San Francisco the next day, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The painful rejections and dismissals, the long nights of doubt and hard work, the triumphant moments and bitter disappointments. I had wanted my family's approval for so long, and when I finally stopped seeking it, I found something more valuable: self-respect and inner confidence that couldn't be shaken by anyone else's opinion. The truth I had learned was simple, but profound. Respect isn't given, it's earned. Not by following others' expectations or fitting into predetermined roles, but by having the courage to chart your own course and the determination to see it through. Sometimes the people who should support you the most are the last to recognize your worth. But that doesn't diminish your accomplishments or your right to be proud of them. Have you ever had to prove your worth to family members who underestimated you? Drop a comment below about how you handled it. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And if you know someone who needs inspiration to stand their ground, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your path is yours alone to define. Success is the best response to those who doubt you.